This scene right here will likely go down as one of my all-time core gaming memories and may well never be topped. This is the infamous carrier takeoff sequence from Battlefield 3 Showcase Going Hunting Mission, and today I want to take a bit of a dive into the world of Battlefield and remind myself exactly what makes this franchise so special. Rewind all the way back to February 3rd, 2011. I was 14 years old and I never played a Battlefield game. I think I dabbled a bit in Bad Company 2, but I was pretty much a true COD loyalist at this point. Come home from school, you go on the Xbox, fire up Modern Warfare 2. What more could you possibly want? Then this one day, gameplay of this brand new EA Battlefield game launched. I remember my friends sending it to me and thinking, oh, what's this Battlefield game all about? Obviously the first thing you notice is the stunning visuals. All they're doing is touting this brand new gameplay engine, and it is unlike anything we'd ever seen at this point. It had single player, it had multiplayer, it looked stunning. That's basically all we knew. Fast forward all the way through to December 6th, 2011, that same year. This is back in the era of, announcing and releasing games were like 6 or 7 months apart rather than waiting 5 or 6 years. That day, probably got home from school, had the game, disc goes in, friends get online. Here we go. Fire it up. That's basically the last time I saw sunlight until I had to go to school the next day. For me at least, I'd really never played a game like it. Like I said, I'd been a Call of Duty loyalist at this point, basically forever. And I'd never played a game on the same scale as this. It was outstanding. The graphics were unbelievable. The sound design, also unbelievable. You can go and destroy buildings, and there was dynamic events that happened on the map that would shape it. The destruction physics were out of this world. They had vehicles, there were planes, there were cars, there were tanks. You name it, the game had it. It just, unbelievable. 32 player warfare. Just unfathomable things at this point in my life. And it was the game that sparked the huge Call of Duty versus Battlefield debates that you'd have on the playground, that you'd have at work. It was just this game that really redefined a genre at that point in time. And I think the success of Battlefield 3 is because they followed the formula. And they took that and ran with it 2 years later when Battlefield 4 came along. It had a fun campaign, and granted it was a playable but broken mess realistically at launch. Wasn't really that fun to play for a long time. I think it literally took like 6, 7, 8 months for it to be in a really good state, and probably longer for it to be in its perfect state that it is now, he says in air quotes. But once it was finally fixed and playable, it was just an outstanding game. It followed the same formula as 3. It felt great, it looked great, and it was just fun to play. You would hop on with all your friends, you'd squad up, one of you would be an assault class, one of you would be medic, one of you would be an engineer, and then you'd just go and play all night because it was just fun and addictive, and it was just correct. Everything about it was right, and it was that made the game so successful, I think. So what is that formula that made Battlefield so successful in I was going to say the early days, but I guess realistically it was like the middle days. At its best, Battlefield is truly an experience to behold. It's this game that's addictive and fun and satisfying and all that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, at its worst, Battlefield is a pretty hard game to play. For me, at least, Conquest is the quintessential Battlefield experience. It's all-out war. You go in there with a full squad. Like I said earlier, you've got cars, tanks, planes, massive maps, massive destruction, big objectives, and big team-based multiplayer madness. The core of Battlefield is just having a fun FPS mechanic that is just fun and satisfying, and everything about it just works its best when you play your way. That's the other beautiful thing about Battlefield in those times. You could play it how you wanted to play it. If you wanted to be the assault class that just run and gunned and focused on infantry warfare and just go in and were kicking doors down and just absolutely trying to rock the enemy's world, for lack of a better way of putting it. You could do that. If you wanted to be the engineer, the support class that carried the explosives, that repaired the tanks, but also, you know, carried around an LMG so you could go and just absolutely mow people down from a distance. If you wanted to be a medic, where you could revive people and replenish them with health and give them ammo and, you know, still go out and shoot people, you could still do that. You could. If you wanted to be that support and sniper role where you just sat back at the end of the map and just did what is probably the most satisfying sniper gameplay in any FPS game ever, there it is. And that's what Battlefield did right. You could play it how you wanted to play it. And, you know, the big dynamic maps, that is something that was pretty much exclusive, I feel like, to Battlefield for a long time, where things that you did infected the environment around you. You know, the objectives would change depending on how the map is playing in that minute. You know, the weather would change so much in like 1 and 5. I think that was a bigger thing than 3 and 4. But you still had like environmental destruction that would change the way you played an objective. You know, all of a sudden, the big building falls down in 4, and the objective's at the bottom of a pile of rubble rather than at the top on a like penthouse suite. You know, it's just fun and kept you on your toes, and it was just replayable and satisfying and fun. And that's really, you know, what kept Battlefield so good. You know, and then off the back of 4, we had Hardline, which I must admit I didn't really play that much. I think life just got in the way at that point more than disdain for the game. But, you know, 1 came along a few years later, and I did pick it back up then. I mean, 1 was probably the... I don't even know how you put it into words. It was probably the game for a lot of people that defined how good Battlefield was at its best. You know, it launched well, it was received well, and like off the bat, which was, I think, a bit of needed after some shaky consumer confidence in 4 and Hardline with their launches. But off the bat, you know, it was a fun game. It had stunning visuals. It was like, and no one had done World War One at this point. I think certainly on AAA, but I don't think anyone had really touched it other than some indie games and stuff, you know. So it was this relatively unknown environment that people could just sink their teeth into, and it was just amazing. You know, it was gritty and it was raw and it was just a masterpiece. The whole game was just, I want to say perfection. Truthfully, there's no such thing as a perfect game, but it was so damn close. You know, 5 did a lot right. It was obviously never as well received, but for me, it was just as fun. It was very, very pretty. There was probably the best in-series gunplay and movement mechanics, I would say, personally. It had some interesting design and marketing choices, but nothing game-breaking. It was just stupid little stuff that EA did that was like, oh my god, why have you done that? Because that breaks the immersion, or whatever you want to say. And you can see that because, you know, 7-8 years on, 1 and 5 still have strong player counts. Like, I could still find a lobby easily enough. In fact, I went onto Steam Metrics to have a look at the 30-day averages. Battlefield 5 has 10,500-ish. Battlefield 1 has just shy of 8,000. And then the latest entry, Battlefield 2042, is about 7,500. And that brings me on to my next point. What is the wrong formula? Oh, 2042, where do we start with you? I get that it's hard for a game to be perfect. Most people just settle for good, and most people hope for great, but 2042 was just straight bad. They got the basics wrong. Look back to the start, this game was one of the most hyped games, maybe of all time. There were 4 dev teams on it, it was a $2 billion budget. The era was Back to the Future. There was 128 players on console at a Battle Royale mode. The leaks were coming out in such a way that it just hyped the absolute heck out of the game. Then the actual trailer came out and the hype train was at friggin' full speed. They got everything right, it seemed like. And then the beta came out. And there was no scoreboard, there was no voice chat, specialists were in the game, netcode was terrible, the balancing was terrible, it was a buggy mess. But, you know, it was a beta, issues happen, the game's already delayed like 2 or 3 months at this point. So like a few months on from the beta, the actual game comes out, and for those people that paid $100 to have it early, it came out 5 days early for them, and the reception was not good. In fact, again, it was just bad. You know, every issue from the beta basically still exists. The characters were somehow more unlikable. They added voice lines and stuff to them, which is even more impressive since there's no bloody campaign in the game. It was just bad. You know, I'm not saying it needs to have a campaign to be good, but if you're that, you know, hell-bent on not having a campaign, at least make the characters you have in the game likable. You know, the balancing was somehow worse. The maps were just forgettable, to be honest with you. There's no map I can even remember from 2042. Squads were broken. The UI was broken. It was missing gameplay elements. You know, they didn't have dolphin diving or like whatever you want to call it when you're reversing, or not reversing, yeah, reversing back up. You know, the melee was shit. The game was just bad. The AI had to be put in the game to pad it out because the player bases were that bad, and again, it was just straight bad. The AI was terrible. There were no stat screens, on top of not having a scoreboard still at this point. The sound design was nothing like we'd see from previous Battlefields. You know, the only redeeming factors of the game was going to be Battle Royale and the Portal mode. And the Battle Royale was meh. And the Portal mode, which was promised to be, you know, almost the feature of the game. You know, you could go back and play Bad Company era matches, or you could play Battlefield 3 era matches, or 4 matches, or 1 or 5 or whatever, and it was just shit. It didn't work properly. And on top of that, they, you know, this feature that they touted, they actually ended up taking XP out of because it was so manipulatable that people were using it as XP farms. They had to take the XP out of it, at which point, what's the point? You know, that's the whole thing you play for really, is ranking up and developing your characters and unlocking stuff, and you can't do any of it. It's like, fools. You know, I put the game down after a few days, and honestly, I basically never picked it up again. So 4 years on from that shit show, and consumer confidence is in the toilet. It's probably as low as it's ever been, and people, myself included, are sick of being burned again and again by EA. We are, in theory, maybe a year out from Battlefield 6/2025, or whatever the heck they're going to call this next one. And this one they've really, really got to get right, because they're not going to get any more chances, I feel like. And what have they got to do to get this game right? And that's just get the basics right. Go back to the game's roots. Have good visual and sound design. Obviously, I think both those are fundamental in a Battlefield game, particularly sound design. Very important. If you get those two right, just have fun gameplay and great level design with great destruction and great map variety. That's also fundamental to a Battlefield game, and if they can just get it right, then this is going to be amazing. And fundamentally, all of that combined with the teamwork element from the early Battlefields, this game is going to be a recipe for success. But they've got to stick to those principles, get it right, and back to its roots. Because at its core, these are the fundamental mechanics of a Battlefield game. Just don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Cut out all the bullshit that people don't care about from 1 and 5 and, well, not 1 was good, 5 and 2042. That is the recipe for success. I think Battlefield is such a good series, and such a good level of polish should be required for this game. Even if they got to push it back, get it right, because Battlefield needs to go back to its roots, and they need to get this right for Battlefield to survive as a brand. Because let's not forget, like, the fact that 2042 failed basically caused Battlefront 3 to be canned, in theory, according to the leaks and rumors and stuff. But I love Battlefield. I think it's a great series, and I really hope this next one's a success, and I can't wait to try it no matter what happens. So I'll probably be taking you guys along for the ride. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.